Abdullah, my holy brother.
Good morning, Yossi, my holy brother in the Holy Land.
Yes, greetings from Jerusalem. I miss you. Wish you were here. I wish we were both in Krakow right now.
another promised land. Salam and shalom from North Carolina as well. I really wish as well. What an unusual time. You and I spent the last 10 summers together, at least 4 weeks of it, 3 to 4 weeks of it. So my soul is also aching for that interruption of the routine.
You know, I have to tell you that as much as we Zoom and Skype, it's not the same. And it is a blessing of this time that we have these tools. You know, I mean, it's quite extraordinary that I can just call you anytime and actually see you, and it's really a gift. But inshallah, God willing, we'll be together
Which was
again
unimaginable.
Soon.
In one generation, we moved from writing letters to actually seeing each other from across the globe. So how are you doing during these puzzling, troubling, confusing, maybe slightly joyful in the mix times?
I mean, I have to tell you that I feel a little guilty saying this, but I've had a very good Corona run. I'm working on a book, and sitting in my room is, in that sense, a lockdown is really a gift for a writer. No distractions, disturbances, meetings. It's been really a time of going inward. I've tried to intensify my meditation practice. I've lost a lot of weight. So, you know, I just feel that it's in that sense, it's really been a good time. When I look at what's happening in the world, I really feel guilty saying that. There's been so much suffering, dislocation, and fear. I don't personally feel fearful for the long term. Uh, Neither for Israel, which is a total mess right now. I mean, Israel went from being the showpiece, you know, the poster boy of success in how to deal with Corona, to being a basket case, where now we have the highest rate of infection proportionally in the world. It's just, I mean, what I could talk about it for the next 2 days about
From
how
best
that
to
happened.
worst.
Yes, but I'm looking at what's happening in your country or your countries, in America, in Turkey. It's all so depressing, um, and we're all sharing in a way the same kind of to one extent or another, the same kind of upheaval from the top. We all have these dysfunctional leaders who are either flirting with authoritarianism in Israel's case, or openly embracing it in Turkey's case, and in Trump's case, I think somewhere in the middle. And but I have to tell you, Abdullah, I feel very hopeful. I feel that humanity is going through a major reshuffling, reordering in our being, and I don't believe that anything's going to be the same. We've experienced, in a way, our most universal trauma. The whole world, everybody is connected to this moment in similar ways. And I think that's going to, in some ways, intensify our sense of shared humanity. But tell me, how are you doing? How are you experiencing
I want to explore and share my own sources of hope in this moment of very dark and confusing times to many. But I think we should promise to ourselves, Yossi, when God delivers a blessing, sometimes through some eventual ugly realities like Corona and pandemic, we should take it and celebrate it. I am like you. This has been nothing but a spiritual boot camp for me personally. I also feel guilty because I'm financially, professionally, physical safety wise in a very beautiful home in North Carolina. I still have my job at Duke. My wife has her job. Um, I also struggle not to feel too guilty about this. Few months, I can just not travel. As you know, I was traveling 200 days a year, not go through in and out of airports every other day, and just be with my family.
It's a blessing. It's a blessing, isn't it?
It was a blessing for about 3 months. And then I felt the cabin fever hit so hard. I felt for a while I was like a caged wild animal, just constrained, and I wanted to just travel. Thankfully, I went to Dallas, Texas recently, which was an incredible therapy.
It's the first time I've ever heard a trip to Dallas, Texas described as therapy, but
it was
duly noted.
For me, getting back to my old routine, some normalcy, just I don't know, it breathed some air into my soul. I felt more oxygen in my spiritual and intellectual and emotional world. So it was also time of introspection. I'm not writing a book, but I'm at a stage in my life. I just look back and see what is next. I am going through another cycle of transition. 10 years ago, when I was in the same moment, God brought you and Shalom Hartman Institute into my life, and I devoted this 10 years to see if Jews and Muslims, especially in North America, we have a special commandment and a responsibility, not just solving problems within us, but is there a moral duty, is there a moral responsibility that a voice from Sinai is calling for Jews and Muslims as two very similar, in their best and in their worst, very similar to religious minorities in North America? Do we have a role to play in this very interesting time? And then 10 years of pouring my life into that work, which I hope we will get a chance to talk, it sort of reached to a level now I have to figure out what's next. And this Corona and pandemic gave me that opportunity to slow down, look back, and take some really good lessons from our mistakes and our successes to redesign what the next, I spent my 40s working primarily for this work, and also all the other related work that I'm doing in a higher education.
I spent my 60s.
I wanted to let you say that. So I think the task is, what are we going to do in our 50s and 70s is a task before us, but it's been wonderful. Similarly, personally, I feel so joyous, but intellectually, spiritually, morally, I am in agony, my friend. I'm sitting on a pile of anger, pain, because Corona sort of gave it was already an unpleasant picture of current times. I divided my heart into three main pieces: Israel, Palestine, Turkey, and the United States. That tells you how wise I am. I could have chosen Fiji, New Zealand, I don't know, Monaco. Like, I could have just invest myself in somewhere else a little bit more pleasant. And all three are, in so many ways, almost unanimously just disappointing me in the short run. I am also very, very hopeful. What I see, especially Corona, it became like an X-ray, a CAT scan. It sort of put these three parts of the world that I divided my heart into. It showed what's growing in them, what kind of cancers, what kind of tumors are growing in them, spiritually and morally primarily. And it doesn't look very pleasant. In some ways, it is good for business, for those of us who are just constantly obsessed with the well-being, moral well-being of our communities. That means we have a lot of work to do. In the long run, I am also very hopeful, but primarily I am putting my hope in God and humanity and human history. I know God intervenes so beautifully and miraculously. And I also know human history is full of these dark chapters, including our recent history. But somehow we learn how to bounce back. I just want to be part of that bouncing back. That gives me a lot of hope, excitement, and work harder. But what is feeding your hope, your resilience?
I have to say that the messianic tradition in Judaism, in Islam, in Christianity is so deep. And for the most part, I think we all relate to messianism as a kind of almost a fairy tale.
Utopia.
And a utopia. And, I remember, for my father, who was a Holocaust survivor, the Messiah, was a kind of an ironic joke. Oh yeah, we'll wait for the Messiah. And without getting into the whole question, is it an individual Messiah? Does it represent something else that's God's direct intervention in our world, in our affairs? There's some shared intuition that a large part of humanity has had for thousands of years. And that shared intuition is that one of these days we're going to reach a point in history that we won't be able to continue with business as usual on the strength of human intelligence and initiative and will alone. We're going to come to some wall. And I think we're coming to that point. And the truth is that the moment that part of the world went nuclear and developed the capacity to destroy the planet, for humanity to commit suicide, and then factoring in the environmental crises and the growing crises of authoritarianism and the crisis of legitimacy in democratic societies. If you put all of this together with the tremendous scientific breakthroughs, on the other hand, that humanity is think of what the last 100 years have been like. I mean, we have made more progress in the last 150 years than we have for thousands of years. So something is being speeded up, it's being intensified. And as someone who believes that we're not alone in this story, that there is a creator, there is a plan. And what really, just as an aside, what really helped bring me to that realization, to that moment of faith, was coming to the conclusion as a young man that the only thing in a way that's more absurd than the notion of a God creating the world is the notion that this world created itself. And so
it was just a chain of coincidences.
Yeah. And so when I realized that, yes, the kind of conventional religious notions of God and creator are absurd, but the alternative is even more absurd, that helped bring me to religion. And the mystical traditions in all our faiths have had a very strong my thinking. And so when I look at what this time is in history, we're not going to be able to survive on our own wisdom. That's clear. And there are so many flashpoints. Think of Korea, think of India, Pakistan, think of Israel and Iran. And it just goes on. And that's before we even speak about the environment. We're going to need divine help. And one of the reasons, Abdullah, that I've been so attracted to your vision and of Muslim-Jewish friendship and reconciliation is because I feel that Judaism and Islam, as venerable faiths, as powerful, as sources of great power, mythic power in the human imagination, we have a great responsibility for the future of humanity, especially at this moment. And Muslims and Jews, as we used to say in Brooklyn, we're not doing so good.
To say the least.
To say the least. And then you came along, you enter into my life, and you challenged me with this vision. and saying, you and I together need to work to try to help heal the Muslim Jewish wound. And as you will remember, I thought you were a dreamer. And I said, sure, Abdullah.
Crack.
Yeah, whatever you want, sure. And I feel that what we've done together, and really under your leadership, it's been my privilege to be your partner. And I always felt myself to be taking my lead from you in this. Your vision, your courage has really, I think, been extraordinary. We have brought over 130 young emerging Muslim American leaders to the Hartman Institute to study Judaism, Israel, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, Jewish identity, something unprecedented. And this is really this was your dream, your vision. And so I want to ask you something that you mentioned in passing earlier, but I really want to go back to that, which is what's next for Imam Abdullah Antepli?
Yes, that is not fully baked yet, but let me present the fully uncooked thoughts and reflections and strategies. But before I do that, I just want to both agree and disagree with you, as we always beautifully do. I fully agree that we are heading to something really interesting, unusual.
I love that. I love that Muslim word interesting, because it doesn't mean what it means in English.
Exactly, especially in my own personal dictionary, as you know.
Right. It means interesting with quotation marks.
Exactly. And it's not positive for the audience. I'm just saying, I think the storms that this humanity's ship is facing is forcing everyone, just because within that ship, your little room is tidy. This is not going to survive. Like we are so forced to collectively act in one way or another. There's a beautiful scene in the Talmud and in the Quran. It's amazing how this, from the same source, two realities shows up, where angels challenge God for creating humanity or truth in the Talmud's case. And then God says, I have a plan. I know what you do not know, as it's mentioned in the Quran. I think we are forced to show what God knows or what God's expect of humanity. I agree with you, and I understand fully that universal longing for this unusually different time, the hitting the wall. We have to create some sort of a reality, God's intervention. But I also know, this is where not disagreement with you, but disagreement in our faith traditions. When they presented this messianic piece to us, they didn't always tell us directly how this messianic miracle will be created. God will play God's part, but what does humanity's responsibility to activate that divine intervention? Give Moses a splitting the sea. Well, it required Moses to lose his comfort in the palace. It required convincing his community to go all the way to the Red Sea. It's not give and take fully. God can do whatever God wants, but humanity's investment, giving wings and legs to that messianic dream, so that it's just not just a utopian dream or utopian peace, as Hartman teaches. You don't have to completely alter the nature's way of running things. You have to work within the limits of how nature works, how humanity works. So everything I do is to see, what can I do to bring myself and my community and my Jewish brothers and sisters, put their feet up to their knees to the water with me, so that the sea will be splitting.
Abdullah, well, that's such a beautiful image, because in rabbinic thinking, you know, the mythos of crossing the sea is very much connected with the story of Nachshon ben Aminadav. Nachshon ben Aminadav was a prince within the children of Israel, and the rabbinic legend is that the children of Israel come to the shore of the Red Sea, And as we know from the biblical account, they're crying out and Moses is turning to God. And in the rabbinic version of the story, nothing changes. The sea does not split until Nachshon ben Aminadav plunges into the water. And then his act of faith, his initiative, is what creates the miracle. So that's exactly how I think our traditions really conceive of a partnership between human beings and the divine.
Yeah.
It does not happen with passive waiting. Look, as you know, I'm a Zionist, and one of the things that makes me a Zionist is the courage of those young Zionist rebels in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They were teenagers. And they said, why are we sitting here praying for 2,000 years to return home when we can actually, at that time, get on a boat and go? And they did. And I live in Jerusalem because there was a what I would call a holy secular rebellion against waiting for God to send the Messiah. And so my messianic anticipation is very much an active, even subversive expectation. There is nothing passive about it, but it gives me hope that my efforts are not necessarily futile, and that in the end it's not all up to me. And there's a beautiful rabbinic saying, which is you are not responsible for completing the work, but you must undertake the work. And that's you, Abdullah. You know, when I think of that rabbinic saying, you're the guy who comes most into focus to me.
Thank you very much. It's really beautiful, and I agree that sometimes it takes, ironically, secular people to teach the people of faith that God acts through different agents, and sometimes human agency needs to get involved in the process. So let's reflect a little bit on what would that metaphor of putting our feet into the water so that whatever divine help is going to be activated would look like. One area I want to focus in my next 10 years is we have to do everything we can in our communities, both in Israel, Palestine, as well as in the United States. It's pretty much gone in Turkey. Regretfully, I think Turkey is beyond repair. It will get a lot worse before it gets any better. But in Israel, Palestine, and as well as in the United States, it's still not too late. We have to devote a lot of our resources in holding the center. Holding the center so that this seemingly ever-increasing partisanship to far right and far left, and in so many ways, they are feeding each other. In so many ways, they are in unholy solidarity with one another. And they
beautiful way to put it. Yeah.
They are justifying their ever far getting far from each other through each other's misbehavior. And the center is just getting weaker and weaker. It's not all lost yet. I think overwhelming majority, the upcoming election in the United States will give us a chance to see how that center is still functioning, how much common sense is still there. But for us, as Yossi and Abdullah, and also for Jews and Muslims in both places, we have to devote more resources in holding the center, not political center, but also religious center, moral center. When everybody is invited into partisanship, into foot soldiership, get into the camp and just that's the last thing I will say. Regretfully, some of that would require, I think, morally, to be a little bit self-critical in your own camp. If you are in the center left, like there's so many demons of your own. Everybody's spending their time and energy pointing out the evils on the other side, but not enough of them saying, look, we have our own issues to deal with.
You know, we see that so clearly with how anti-Semitism is being dealt with today. Every time I hear a Republican, somebody from the Republican Party in the US denouncing left-wing anti-Semitism, I just want to pull my hair out. I say, well, what about what's happening in your own camp?
Yeah.
And the same, of course, goes for the progressives. It's so easy for a progressive to point to Charlottesville and to point to the QAnon and all of the outrages happening on the far right, and completely ignore the delegitimization of Israel and the Jewish people that's taken for granted in so much of progressive discourse.
Right.
And what I want to say to all of those who are condemning anti-Semitism is, I'm not interested. I don't want to hear left-wingers condemn right-wing anti-Semitism and right-wingers condemn left-wing anti-Semitism. Condemn the anti-Semitism in your camp, and then I will take you seriously as an ally.
Exactly. Exactly. This is, as you know, when you challenge the collective wisdom of your own camp, it's a very lonely and painful path. It is almost masochistic in its nature that you sort of invite pain and struggle with your own people, and which is often more difficult to bear if your enemies and foes are attacking you, criticizing you, insulting you, or saying horrible things about you. Pretty much you have a way to dismiss them because you are not part of them. But I think it's in our evolutionary biology that when your own camp, which I suffered so much in the last 10 years within the Muslim community, when people of your own people sort of says, you are a betrayal, you betrayed us, or you are not part of us, or we declare you as persona non grata. It's not, but I want to sort of double down in that direction, not just the Muslim community, but American left, American, as I consider myself as a religious, progressive, liberal, I hate these labels, but as center left person, I want to see the camp here. I am so dismayed, so many things about the far right, but I'm also very dismayed, this categorical dehumanization of the entire 50% of the nation. If anything, the last election showed us in 2016, people in my camp really don't understand so many Americans. People don't understand so many people. And I am painfully now realizing in 2020, 40 years later, we even understand less. We have even more sort of mental blocks, anger, rage, hate in my own camp, blinding us, not trying to understand people who are not in our camp.
Abdullah, I want to go back to your own experience in challenging anti-Semitism in the Muslim community, in reaching out to the Jewish community, in creating this extraordinary partnership that you and I have been promoting for the last 10, 15 years, and the enormous price you've paid. And I want viewers to know the death threats, the death threats not only to you, to your family, having to move out of your home at a certain point, the FBI stationed outside your door, the numerous friendships that you lost, and I guess they weren't real friendships. That's how one discovers who's a friend and who isn't. But you've really discovered that the hard way, and you've been really an example for me, and you've chastened me just from your courage. And the book that I wrote 2 years ago, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, which was really my attempt to reach out to my Palestinian neighbor, would never have happened. I would have never written that book if it wasn't for our friendship. You forced me to. First of all, you gave me a language of how to speak about the Israeli-Palestinian tragedy to Muslims. But more deeply, you gave me an example of how to push myself and how to challenge my own camp. Because for many years, as you well know, I was perfectly content to repeat the line, which you'll hear from most Israelis. We tried to make peace. The Palestinians responded with terrorism. There's no way the Palestinians will accept our legitimacy here. Now, I still believe a lot of that, but that's not good enough for me anymore, because I also have to look at my side's responsibility for perpetuating the conflict. And you know, Abdullah, when you're in an existential conflict, as I've lived for so many years, it's very hard to step out and to try to show empathy for your enemy. Your impulse is to protect yourself, to protect your people, your country, your story. The Jewish story, the Zionist story, is under such sustained assault that my instinct is just to push away. And yet you didn't let me do that. And our friendship didn't let me do that. And I suppose I'm grateful to you for complicating my life. And it's about to get more complicated, Abdullah, because the Hebrew version of Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor is coming out.
Let's see.
And then, to use an Abdullah term, then it's going to get interesting.
I think you beautifully reciprocated my risk that I was taking with my own community. Thankfully, you faced a lot less harsh, vitriolic reaction. But what kept me going, despite the huge prices that I have paid, in believing in your morality, in believing in so many people like you in the Jewish communities, I was convinced that there are so many moral people that we can talk to, we can have business with, that my community's total and categorical rejection in certain parts was not reasonable, was not Islamic, was not in sync with the ethical, moral teachings of my community. But I couldn't have done it if I haven't really came to a very clear observation and testing of the incredibly deep commitment, including to the Palestinian suffering as well. I wish more of my people would know. Many of their Jewish brothers and sisters are almost in the same length of pain for so many human rights violations that the Palestinians are suffering under occupation, either inflicted by the occupation or by their own leadership. But my community cannot take this Jewish brothers and sisters as equally morally outraged about this with them to a potential constructive set of actions, because we don't really understand each other. We don't really see the morality on all sides. So that gratitude, respect, admiration is incredibly mutual, because without me experiencing that moral clarity, as much as a moral clarity is possible, or moral dilemmas, that's a better word, moral struggles, very few people are enjoying seeing Palestinians just keep suffering in a cycle of violence in one way or another. No one gets the joy sending their 17, 18-year-old children to IDF, knowing what might happen. There is no categorical evilness in that sense. So that got me going. And you sort of opened my eyes into that reality. And therefore, I was able to go in full force.
Well, so let me really reciprocate in terms of what I've learned about Islam from you, and really from the community we've created of American Muslim leaders participating in our program. And what I wish more people understood about Islam and about the nature of Muslim spirituality is the beauty, just the extraordinary power of Muslim prayer, the deceptive simplicity of Muslim spirituality. And as you know, one of my great joys is to participate with our groups in your prayer services, as you do when you come to Israel, participating in Jewish prayer. That's something, you know, that you and I have come to take for granted. Oh, here's Abdullah in synagogue. Oh, there's Yossy in the prayer line. And there's something that is so counterintuitive to this time, to this historic moment, in the way you and I have come to feel so comfortable in each other's prayer lives. And, I hear the muezzin, the call to prayer, from sitting in my study here in Jerusalem. I hear it 5 times a day, and certainly when I have insomnia, which I often do, and I really hear it 5 times a day and night. And sometimes I'll hear the call to prayer, and I'll suddenly be galvanized, and say, wait a minute, that's not background noise. That's a summons to all of us, whether you're Muslim or Jew or Christian or of no particular faith. That's a summons to stop your blind rote, and remember that there's some big drama being played out in our lives. We're not going to be here forever. Try to struggle with the meaning of your life. And lately, Abdullah, I wanted to share this with you. When I hear the call to prayer, I start to pray for my Muslim friends, for you, for others in the group, and it's such a powerful experience of this feeling that I have a connection to that call to prayer through all of you, and that's a real gift.
It's a gift. I think what makes it even more precious and holy is that attachment, that the noble and holy things that azan, that call to prayer, is activating in you, is not any it doesn't take any of your Judaism. You are not interested in to become a Muslim. It's not like just admiring somebody's tradition. What is so beautiful is when I'm in a shul, when I'm davening, when I'm praying with my Jewish brothers and sisters, it makes me a better Muslim. When I hear the shofar or chants, it's almost like acts like a call to prayer in me. It activates the kind of mechanism that makes me a better Muslim, better believer, better connection to my holy texts. That's I think the ultimate success of interfaith, cross-faith engagement. That as you develop love and appreciation, respect to somebody's faith, only through that cross-faith conversation, not in your own community, you feel like you grow in your own. You get deeper, more deeply rooted in your own faith tradition. Our challenge is how to scale this up, how to model, because it's very counterintuitive. People think you can only appreciate people if you sort of compromise, dilute certain commitments and borders of your own faith tradition. If you compromise from certain particularisms, which is not true. It's possible. It's really possible that this interfaith engagement can also become a journey of a mirror. It becomes an experience. You see yourself, your faith, your tradition in a very unique way. And therefore, you just get into a different discourse as a Muslim, as a Jew.
Abdullah, you have taken the interfaith adventure, and I really call it, in some ways, the great spiritual adventure of our time, is the opportunity to cross those lines and enter deeply into another faith without having to give up your own. And that characterizes our age in a way that was never true in the past. In the past, if I wanted to experience something of Islam, I had to become Muslim.
Yes.
And vice versa. There was no way to have experienced the inner beauty, the vitality of another religion without actually becoming that. And so we live really in an extraordinary moment. And you have taken interfaith as far as just about anybody I know. You've also had frustrations with the Interfaith Encounter. I know this from our conversations over the years. And how do you feel today? Where is interfaith at? Let's focus on the Jewish Muslim piece of it.
Sure. My frustrations have gotten even thicker and deeper because as time went by and as Jews and Muslims have been facing even greater challenges, I see how ineffective the existing interfaith strategies have been, how toothless, how weak they are. That these big events, even not too big, or violence between our communities, immediately washes them away because they are not so deeply rooted, unfortunately. As you know, one of my biggest criticism, and I put my money where my mouth is, this lack of confidence that whatever is dividing us, whatever issues we have, we can only be friends. We can only be in relationship if we can put them as elephants in the room and not talk about it. It's just unbelievable. It became almost a religion between Jewish-Muslim dialogue circles. We shouldn't talk about Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The logical fallacy aside, I think seeing this over and over, decade after decade, that it's not working, but still sticking to it and expecting a different result, I think this is the definition of insanity. I just don't understand. Logically, it doesn't make sense. Practically, last 30 years, it doesn't really produce anything important. So I don't know why we would stick with it.
Well, people are understandably afraid that the Palestinian-Israeli issue will sabotage any chance of Muslim-Jewish dialogue, even thousands of miles away. But as we've learned, it's going to sabotage the dialogue, whether you let it into the room or try to keep it out. Sooner or later, it's going to blow things up.
I think through our MLR program,
maybe just explain. Well, say
Muslim
maybe just
Leadership
explain.
Initiative is a program that I take emerging Muslim American leaders from Canada and the United States, from North America, to Hartman, which is not an interfaith dialogue center. It's an educational center where they teach Judaism as religion, Jews as people, Zionism as a form of identity, and Israel as a state through lenses of tradition. It is a Jewish conversation to see the world. So I take these Muslim leaders not for a dialogue, but to get this education, try to see and understand, not agree, but see and understand Jews, Judaism, Zionism, and Israel as Jews see in a large spectrum way. Like, is there a way in which I can see the world through your eyes? I can still look at the Jewish psychological map of the 21st century as you see it. Again, with no obligation to agree or come to a consensus about it. And Jews themselves do not come to consensus about anything. So, and it worked. It's like one of those situations, for the most part, in a lab environment, for the most part, those relationships are formed. Maybe not a lot of ideas have changed, but still we are in conversation. We are still in relationship with one another, in a loving, respecting relationship with one another.
Yeah, how do you understand the deep bitterness of the attacks against you for the program within the Muslim community? How do you deal with that? You love your community. You love your faith. You did this to try to help your community confront certain obstacles in its own thinking. You did it to help your community grow. You didn't, and I remember you saying this many times to me at the beginning. I'm not doing this for you. I'm not doing this for the Jews. I'm doing this for the Muslims. And yet the pushback, the hatred, the rage against you, how do you keep from being bitter? How do you
not
deal
only
with that?
for I do love American Muslim community. And not only I did this for my community, but for Islam itself. Islam as a religion is not doing well. Islam, because in many of the Muslim majority parts of the world, the economic, social, political, cultural, civilizational setting is so broken, so deeply failed, it doesn't allow the best of Islam. It doesn't allow the most beautiful teachings of Islam to flourish. This religion, or any religion, requires a healthy environment to bring their ideals and aspirations into reality or practice. So I have a lot of hopes and expectation that American Muslim experience, as American Muslim identity, as it is flourishing in the existing civilizational, economic, social, political health of American society, will bring a different kind of Islam, different understanding of Islam. American Islam, or American Muslim identity, when it is fully emerged in its all beautiful diversity, will will, in a way, will be a lifeline to global Islam or religion as we know it. It will give a compelling compelling answer to this static, frozen, somewhat underdeveloped Muslim thinking or civilizational thinking. The attacks only confirms my worry that my community, as we try to make Islam work in America, which is relatively a healthier place than many other parts of the Muslim majority world, it only confirms that my community's collective wisdom in understanding America, and within that understanding of American Jews or America's relationship with Israel and Zionism, my community is almost majority of Americans are on one side of the river, like Abraham. My community is on the other side of the river. And I wanted to challenge that collective wisdom, that our conclusion on Jews, Judaism, and Zionism and Israel is wrong. And not only wrong, it's morally questionable. And our ability to engage with fellow Americans in this regard is handicapped. And do you want to prove your reaction to this small program that you pretty much people proved my point, how far behind, how out of the curve, how tone deaf we are in our ability to understand our fellow Americans to these central issues and points. I am pained. I am psychologically very pained by that rejection, that vitriolic. But it only makes me more committed to do what I do more. And that's exactly what I'm planning to do in the next 10 years.
You know, I think that our work, as I'm listening to you, I think that our work connects in a very deep way to the vision that you're laying out for your next decade of work. This plan to somehow strengthen the center, and I think that what we have tried to do with the Muslim Leadership Initiative, and I think this is really true for so much of the Hartman Institutes, which generally our internal Jewish work, which cuts across denominational and political lines, and then our interfaith work, is really to try to create models of empathy within the context of disagreement, even deep disagreement, and that the invitation of MLI to its participants is, we will open up internal Jewish discourse. We will invite you into how we within Israel, within the Jewish community, argue about our own issues, struggle with our own issues. We will treat you as partners. We're going to open those inner doors. And we don't ask of you anything in terms of agreeing with us. We're not asking you to take a position. All we're asking you to do is engage with us and listen. And because this was an educational project and not a political project, I think we were really able to succeed. And we have an overwhelmingly successful track record. Almost all of our participants have described this program as life-changing. I mean, that's what we've seen in the evaluations over and over again. And now, God willing, we're going into our 8th cohort. And so there's something in that model that I think we need to own and explore more deeply, which is the ability to enter into deep disagreement, remain in deep disagreement, but with empathy. And that's, again, what I learned from you and have tried to apply in my own writing, in my work with Palestinians. And, you know, I had a decision to make, a very difficult decision. And you know this, we've talked about this. When the paperback edition of Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor was being prepared, I knew that I had to have a new epilogue, which was the responses that I've gotten from Palestinians. I've gotten lots of written responses, and also from people around the Arab world. And the decision that I had to make was, do I put those letters into the epilogue as the last word, or do I respond to them? Do I give myself the last word? And I made the decision in large part because of the model that I've learned from you of no, step back. Give your neighbor the last word in your book. And Abdullah, you know how hard that was for me. I wrote this book to defend the Israeli story, to defend the Israeli story from this brutal attack that we've been under, the attack questioning our most basic right to exist, and to give the Palestinian counter narrative not only place in my book, but to give it the last word was something I would have never been able to do if it wasn't for our friendship and if it wasn't for the way in which you have modeled courage and empathy in disagreement.
Not only,
So,
not only I know how hard that was for you, I observed it. Not only I know, but I love and appreciate, and it only confirms the holiness of you and what you represent and what you have taught me. I will only be as proud if a Palestinian would reciprocate, write a book proudly defending Palestinian rights for sovereign state or whatever aspirations that Palestinian community, or long list of things that they deserve, yet include a few Jewish and Zionist responses. I really hope that will become over time an invitation for some reciprocal decency and goodwill, and I know it will in the long run.
I think the crucial word that you've just said, Abdullah, decency.
Yes.
Simple decency. And when you look at around the world today, look at your country now, your countries again. I look at my country, and so much of the political discourse simply lacks basic decency, and it's so puzzling, really, because you're not giving anything up by showing some decency. You're not compromising your position. Quite the opposite. In the long term, you're strengthening your credibility. And yet there seems to be something in the way that politics is being argued today, really in the way that I think religion used to be argued, in this take no prisoners, theological,
burn it all,
gladiator warfare,
right.
That somehow has been transferred in a very poisonous way to politics.
I share your pain, but I also understand why something like as simple as most common sense as decency is rare, increasingly rare, because decency is punished and lack of decency is promoted and rewarded. That partisanship, like you could say anything about your enemies and it goes. It doesn't have to be in any direction. But going back to your wonderful summary of our work, developing empathy on all sides, another way of explaining that word, rather partially mischievously, is inflicting everybody in your own camp the burden of knowing.
It's a great way to put it.
Inflicting the burden of knowing. I think you, as painful as it was, left your paperback edition of your book with a group of Palestinian voices, which are most of it very difficult for you or people in the Jewish community to hear. But yet doing that in the name of decency and goodwill, which is incredibly praiseworthy and admirable. Also a reflection of knowing, even if you don't feel you are an occupier in West Bank, you don't occupy the land because you think, and you have every right to think that way, but you are occupying a group of people. And if not the land, there are a few million people and you are in charge. And there is no way else to run away from that responsibility.
This is what I hope Israelis who read my book will understand, that, and again, this comes to the question of empathy. I believe deeply that the Jewish people has a strong historical claim to all of this land, including what's called the West Bank and Jews called Judea and Samaria. But there's another people there. And so my starting point is it all belongs to me, but that's not my end point. My end point is we have to share. And maybe in some way, that model of saying, I'm not sacrificing what I believe is mine in principle, but for the sake of peace, for the sake of justice, for the sake of reconciliation, I need to compromise. And maybe that's the model of the center that you and I are trying to present. And Abdullah, we're going to have to, unfortunately, wind down. I really feel we're just getting going.
I know. I feel like we just started, but I want to really finish my inflicting people with the burden of knowing. I want to inflict my community with the burden of knowing that Israel, Zionism, and North American Jews' connection to Israel, it is not just simply a colonial land grabbing. It is not just sheer racism. It's not just looting, as many in my community, unfortunately, came to believe and arrived at as a conclusion, without really compromising from our solidarity from our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Continue to be in solidarity with them, help them improve their lives and achieve their big picture and small picture goals. We have a way in which, without delegitimizing and categorically dehumanizing creation of the state of Israel, there is so much to be learned. If they know that this is not entirely just another wave of crusades or another colonial project, once enough decent people understand the complexities and see the humanity, see the religious connection. I think one of the success of our program is for a lot of Muslims who understood all of this as a post-Second World War secular political issue. Yes, in so many ways they are, but there is also a spiritual, textual, traditional, and religious longing and reconnection that needs to be acknowledged. Once enough number of decent people are inflicted by that burden of knowing, see the humanity, and I think then the center will get a whole different cycle of life expectancy.
It's really interesting because when I think about how that plays out on my side, I think that most Israelis know on some level what Palestinians are going through. We serve in the army, we're occupiers, we experience it, we see it. But when you're in a conflict that's so bitter and so threatening, you teach yourself not to see.
Yeah.
And I feel that what I need to help Israelis understand is that we have to look, we have to see. And then whatever conclusions we'll come to, we at least are doing it by acknowledging the reality. And yes, I believe that Palestinian leadership is deeply implicated in this tragedy, but so are we. And there's no avoiding that. And we didn't come home with the intention of displacing another people, but that has been the consequence of my coming home. And I need to own that. I need to come to terms with it. And I need to do everything I can to try to use your beautiful phrase, really, to make sure that my people knows that we have the burden of knowing. And again, I don't believe for a moment that compromises our right to be here, the justice of Zionism, of the Jewish return home. But it's a human story, and human stories are complicated.
Indeed.
And maybe Abdullah, I'd like to just wrap this up by going back to what you just said a moment ago about the acting as a religious person and acting from that consciousness, that place of being a religious person, and the burden of being a religious person, and the burden of being a religious person in a secular age, the burden of being a religious person as a custodian of a conflict that is so heavily laden with religious sensibilities. And what I feel in the work, in the partnership, the fellowship that you and I have created is, at its basis, this is religious work you and I are doing. And what we're trying to do is take on something of the humility that both of our religious traditions at their best, we know what they look like when they're not, when they don't behave, but at their best, inculcate the sense of humility in just being a mortal creature who's here for a very short period of time. And in trying to develop this model of empathy, of respectful, even passionate disagreement, there's something I feel that we're trying to do as religious people in approaching, if one can dare to use this language, something or partaking of something of the complex mind of God. Because, you know, when you think about what the mind of God must be, that to encompass all of existence, means that for God, paradox, contradictions are the stuff of what goes on in the divine mind. Contradictions are not a problem. That's the essence in some way. And so what we're really trying to do, I think, as religious people, is create a model in which contradictions can be embraced, tolerated, but more deeply, maybe even celebrated. And so, Abdullah,
I think it's a beautiful way to end this wonderful conversation, which I'm really grateful to the organizers.
Maybe Janos Makuch, thank you.
Yes,
our holy brother in Poland,
in Krakow, indeed, another holy individual trying to heal some really millennium-long wounds there. Maybe in this, what you beautifully said, trying to make a human attempt to understand the complexities of the God's mind. Maybe in that, Judaism, with its emphasis on struggling with these complexities, Islam, with its emphasis on surrendering to the will of God in the face of these complexities, maybe we are different pieces of the puzzle. Maybe that's our work. When we bring that sense of struggle with that contradictions of life and God's wisdom, yet this commitment, at least human attempt to long-term commitment to surrender and submit, as Muslim tradition is facing, and we don't always do a good job as Muslims. Let's bring these two pieces of the puzzle and see the picture it presents will give us a different kind of being a religious person, being an American, being a Jew, being a Muslim, being an Israeli, Palestinian. Maybe this will make a difference.
Beautiful. Well, that's why you're my Imam. Holy brother.
And as we say in Islam, next year in Krakow, let's we will finally together. I know you've been there a few times. I have never been. I really would like to be in that Israeli cultural festival. And I've been to Krakow, as you know, many times, but not for festivals or celebrations. It was for tazia, as we say, visiting horrific sites and honoring their legacy of those millions of victims who perished there.
Well, this is the greatest Jewish culture festival in the world. I really am not just saying that because we're doing this. I've said this to Janos privately many times. I've written this, and it's so great to be with you in the framework of the festival. And yes, next year in Krakow.
Inshallah.
Lots of love, Abdullah.